I am a walking disaster, leaving destruction in my wake wherever I go. Mesdames et messieurs, garçons et filles, jokers of all ages, welcome back to the Worst Fantasy Show. We have a big one for you guys today, though. It is the Rookie Wide Receiver Show. You know I needed some help for this one. We're breaking down our top 10 NFL rookies coming into this 2024 class for the NFL Draft as far as fantasy football is concerned. And so I brought in with me today, he is a redraft and dynasty guru. He's been on the show before. Welcome back, Caleb Niemi.
In a world where fantasy players don't know where to turn, there are those who have taken up the mantle of guardianship. These are the heroes working tirelessly to safeguard our fantasy futures.
Welcome back to the show, Caleb.
I am just, not only was that intro absolutely amazing, I don't think that'll ever be outdone, but I'm just appreciative that I've made it back onto the show. You know, the first time it just wasn't the best, I didn't give like all the best things, because if I gave the best, it wouldn't be the worst fantasy show out there. So therefore, I'm glad you welcomed me back. I'm glad to kind of carry the mantle on my second time here on the show. So thanks for having me, Jack.
Man, I'm so thrilled to have someone to help me with these wide receivers because, man, I did most of my tape dogging for this show today. And at one point, I just was like tapping out. I was like, this is just too many. There's like 15 legitimate wide receivers that could be and should be drafted in the NFL draft and in fantasy football drafts. I put out my list earlier on Twitter just to kind of see what was some early pushback, and already I was struggling like with especially 8 to 10 because it's like I could have put like 7 guys in there.
Yeah, no, this class is absolutely amazing. I think for those of us that have super late, like maybe you were competing this year and you ended up with the 109, the 110 in like a super flex league, and you kind of look and you were like, well, I'm going to end up with an okay prospect. Like right now, you look at the whole first round and it's absolutely insane. You got early seconds. Early seconds are essentially like middling first in most classes. So it's an insane class. So I'm excited to dive into these wide receivers with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to start it off right away with number 1. You can take us away since you're the guest on the show.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So my first player, of course, is going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't know if anybody in the dynasty space can kind of debate on who the 101 is. I think there's a lot of people that like to be a little bit clickbaity by saying, hey, maybe I'll throw someone like Malik Neighbors up there at the wide receiver 1 mantle. But for someone like me, I'm an Ohio State Buckeye fan, so I am biased 100%. But I have never seen a wide receiver come through Ohio State like Marvin Harrison Jr. We've had some great ones over the last few years and even over the long entire history of Ohio State. But I honestly think Marvin Harrison Jr. is up there probably with Chris Carter as the best wide receiver in Ohio State history. So for me, he's got the build. He's not built like his daddy. He's a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, a little bit better at the catch point. I think a lot of the kind of the weaknesses that people like to talk about with Marvin Harrison Jr. honestly are just us nitpicking him at this point. Best wide receiver prospect since Jamar Chase. I actually think he's a better prospect than Jamar Chase. But it's absolutely insane that we're talking about him, but we're going to talk about a bunch of guys that in most normal classes would be the wide receiver 1 if there wasn't some type of generational prospect like Marvin Harrison Jr.
It's crazy because I have seen those arguments online, like you said, of should maybe Malik Neighbors be number 1, or could it maybe be Rome Odunze or something like that if you're really dark wanting to go with a dark horse candidate. But honestly, after I watched literally like a minute of tape on Marvin Harris, I was like, no, this guy is next level, even in a tier on his own compared to the number one tier of wide receivers in this draft. I mean, besides the fact that he's prototypical with the NFL pedigree, everything I saw from him, it was two things. It's like, yeah, he can make the contested over the shoulder catches, which is like what you need to see from a prospect going into the NFL, because those are the more difficult catches they're going to have to make. But man, the separation this kid was getting, it was like nobody could keep up with him. And it was like they were 5 yards downfield in every direction. He was on an island half the time. And it wasn't just game-breaking speed. It was the combination of the route and the speed and just the moves and everything together. It was like you could not even cover this kid half the time. So I have him as my de facto number one. I actually had him pretty easily my number one over even who would be my number two on the list. And we've talked about him a little bit. Malik Nabers. I kind of would have preferred to see him go to the combine and like show out a little bit. But I think it's clear enough that he is. I've seen some comps to Justin Jefferson. I don't see him quite that good, but it's if I was gonna say Justin Jefferson light, you could get me there. So with Malik Nabers, even though he's 6 foot 200 pounds, a little bit smaller than some of these other guys, he just is a pure NFL wide receiver. Like you can just tell by watching.
Yeah, no, I have him as my wide receiver too. So I'm glad we're both there aligned on this. I know we're definitely going to get some debates here later on, but I think for Malik Nabers, the big thing with me is that this was a normal class, he'd be the wide receiver one of the class. The big weakness that I think Malik Nabers' game is that he won a lot in the slot. So I think a lot of people will use that against him. But same way that you're talking about him, I still have him clearly as my wide receiver too. I know he didn't show up at the combine, didn't run a 40-yard dash, anything like that. I mean, we haven't seen him really run a 40-yard dash since his like senior year of high school. And really it's nothing crazy, but apparently it's somewhere around like a 4.4 is where it was in high school. So we can assume that got a little bit faster, but I don't think he's necessarily like a burner like we saw with, of course, some guys running in the 4.3s, but you don't need to win like that in the NFL nowadays. We've seen guys like Puka Nacua have a ton of success. So for me, I really like Malik Nabers. Not saying that Malik Nabers, I think, has, of course, a better prospect profile than Puka Nacua did coming out of BYU last year. Absolutely love some Malik Nabers as my wide receiver too.
Yeah, I think the other thing about him is when I looked at him, he to me was probably the most likely, besides Marvin Harrison Jr., to transition quickly into the NFL and have a good rookie season. And it was a lot of because of his ability to kind of play in the slot, almost mirror the type of game that like an Amon-Ra St. Brown would have, where he's going to have those reliable targets. It's not to say that he can't play on the outside, because we've seen that from Amon-Ra. We've seen it from Justin Jefferson. But when you have the ability to do both, it seems like those guys hit sooner, faster, earlier in terms of just pure volume. And it's kind of easier to see that talent emerge quicker in their careers, I think.
No, 100%. And I think if you look back on this year, clearly Malik Nabers should have won the Blitnikoff Award as the best wide receiver in college football. I know Marvin Harrison Jr. won it. Marvin Harrison Jr. should have won it as a junior. So it feels like it was like a 2-year award that Marvin Harrison Jr. was able to get. But Malik Nabers honestly was the best receiver in college football this year, even as amazing as Marv was this year. I mean, when you're paired with Jaden Daniels, that definitely did help Malik Nabers compared to Kyle McCord, who was the worst quarterback in Ohio State history that we've had over the last 30 years. So it was just impressive that Marv could even put up stats when he's getting thrown the ball like that. But I'm with you. I think Malik Nabers, like I said, clear wide receiver too. And the sky is the limit. I don't know what the floor is going to end up being, but I think by the time he gets drafted, probably somewhere around like wide receiver 8 to wide receiver 11 in startup value. I probably should have checked the ADPs now, but we'll see what happens once those draft landing spots happen.
Well, and that's something I should have mentioned too, like obviously at the top of the show, is that this entire list could very much change tomorrow based on the NFL draft. This is a pre-draft list, so it's not anything set in stone, but based on, I based a lot of my stuff just off like what I watched on tape. And when I say tape, I mean a combination of I'm obviously not out here watching full college games. I watch condensed games.
Yeah.
I'll watch like 1 or 2 condensed games for like a lot of the top prospects. I'll watch highlights for every single player basically, and I'll try and pick out the bad things in the highlights is what I try to do. Kind of pick out the weaknesses in the good stuff, and then obviously combination of their college production profile mixed with their NFL combine profile. So it's like all of those different things. There's a little bit of method to the madness. This is the worst fantasy show. I actually do a little bit of homework when I do a show like this. But like I was saying, this could all change based on like where they fall in the draft. You know, JSN is a perfect example of like, actually talent doesn't always win out when you already have all pro wide receivers in front of you. So if he were to fall somewhere where there's already a stacked wide receiver room, that could present some challenges. But given his stock and where he's probably going in the draft in terms of Harrison and Malik Neighbors, I don't think we have to worry about that for them too.
No, both are going to be top 10 picks. We'll see where Malik Neighbors ends up falling to, but super excited for both of them.
Okay, so we'll flip back to you here. We'll see if we deviate at all. Who is your number 3?
My number 3 is going to be Rome Odunze, and I think you might have posted something on Twitter. I was kind of seeing earlier today. I don't know if those are the exact rankings that you're going to be talking about today, but Rome Odunze to me, like he's always kind of been my clear wide receiver 3, but I think the combine definitely helped make the push closer to the wide receiver 2 range. Now, granted, I still feel like we got Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors right here, and then Rome Odunze is like right here. So it's they're tiered for me, but they're also super close. I think for me with Rome, of course, great college production profile. When you're looking like at weaknesses, the big one that I found just watching tape and just kind of hearing what scouts were saying is just a lot of it is how he's winning. He also had like a lot of coverage that was playing off him at all times. I mean, when you're an amazing wide receiver like a Marvin Harrison Jr., like a Rome, like a Malik Neighbors, like people are not coming up pressing you, doing a lot of hand jabbing, hand fighting with you at the line of scrimmage. And he like kind of struggled with that once you got into the college football playoffs, playing against better cornerbacks at some of the true blue bloods. So for me, Rome, I liked what I saw at the draft combine where he was showing out at the 3-cone drill. Like he was, showing that he wanted to hit a score. Honestly had a pretty good day considering all the other hype that a lot of the other wide receivers are getting on the 40-yard dash and stuff like that. So for me, I still like Rome. He's going to be going top 8. I think there was the hope that maybe the Bears were going to be able to get him at 9. But I think after the showing that he had at the combine, he's definitely going to be going in the top 6, top 7 picks.
So the list that I put out on Twitter is in fact the exact list that we are discussing right now. First of all, and this is in fact where we are going to deviate on this list. Now I have Rome Odunze next on the list at number 4, so it's not like I have him like way down or anything. But in my notes, and you said it, I have contested catch, hands, screens, needs more natural separation at the next level, and could be offense dependent. Now, if he lands in like a Shanahan style offense or a McVay style offense, forget about it because they're going to be able to utilize his talents like to max capacity. But if he were to land in a less creative offense, kind of what we saw with Treylon Burks in Tennessee, just kind of that vibe. Not saying that he is Treylon Burks, but just the vibe of landing in an offense that isn't necessarily offensive friendly. You know what I'm saying? Like the whole defensive minded, run first head coach style of NFL program, I think would be doing a disservice to Rome Odunze. And to me, the more natural, easy, prototypical, almost for sure going to hit wide receiver is actually Brian Thomas Jr. And I feel like because this happens a lot where it's like, oh, well, Malik Neighbors. Guys, Brian Thomas Jr., this man is huge and fast. He is 6'3", 209, basically the same size as Rome Odunze, except he ran a sub 4.40 at 4.33. He just makes NFL catches. Now, he needs to tighten his routes a little bit, but everything I saw from this guy is he could be a monster at the next level in basically any NFL offense. And if he lands in the right one, he could be like a real, like absolute killer, like 1,500-yard seasons in like a true NFL style offense. So to me, he was just that little step above Rome Odunze. And when you're talking about like again, it's very little separating them two. But when I looked at his body of work, the way he catches the ball, his size and speed combination, everything together, he was a little bit more of a freak to me than even a Roma Duns.
Yeah, so I had Brian Thomason Jr. at wide receiver 4 for me, so only one spot behind where you are having him, and everything that you said is right on. I think, honestly, he was the biggest winner from the NFL Combine for the wide receiver. I mean, just being 6'3", being able to run a 4.3, 340, absolutely impressive. The big thing to me is he had the 20 total touchdowns last season for LSU, so he's a big touchdown catcher with having that elite level speed, and I know this is going to make you happy. My comp for him is Martavius Bryant. A lot of people aren't going to remember because, a lot of people just started playing Dynasty or just started playing fantasy football. But my guy, when he was a Steeler, dude was a fantasy football legend where he could just pop off for a ton of fantasy football points for you. So that's who I'm kind of comparing him to. I think he could be a little bit more juiced up than that. But it depends, of course, where he lands. That's definitely going to play a factor into his overall fantasy football output year one. But he definitely made himself a ton of money because now I think he's for sure a top 20 pick, if not top 16 type pick after what he did at the combine.
Yeah, I mean, the combine just kind of like sealed the deal. But again, when I was watching game tape, you talk about the separation that he was able to create as compared to like a Roma Duns. It's like he almost reminded me of like fast Mike Evans, like, or you said Martavis Bryant, like, yeah, if Alien could have, been a little thicker and, maybe a little sturdier in the hands, then I could see that. But like, man, I really think Brian Thomas, again, this is like we talked about if Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't exist. Like, you could argue to me Malik Neighbors or Brian Thomas, like which one should go first, because I think, yeah, Malik Neighbors probably the more like traditional Justin Jefferson light style receiver that we talked about earlier. But Brian Thomas to me is like, you talk about a guy that could pop 3 for 150 and 2 touchdowns in a game pretty easily, even at the NFL level. Like, he fits that mold and style for me.
I like it.
So he's a scary prospect. But yeah, we have our 3 and our 4 flipped. This is where things are going to get a little hectic. I feel like is number 5. All right.
Yes.
Because I'm sorry, I'm fully on the hype train. I gotta get this out. I've fallen for Ladd McConkey. I gotta admit, I have him at number 5. I have him that high.
And are you ready? I should say this. I have him also as my wide receiver 5. So we're in the same boat. We're in the same boat.
Damn. All right.
Shout out to Ladd McConkey for just when I watched him. I mean, granted, he had all the like super typical things we say about a white guy wide receiver, a Cooper Kupp, Hunter Henry. Like, he runs great routes. He really knows how to create the separation because he's not an elite athlete. And then all of a sudden, this guy goes to the NFL Combine and shows not only can he do all of that, but he's also insanely fast. Like 4.39, like absolutely impressive for Ladd McConkey. And I think to me, that was the eye opener. Is like, this dude is not just Cooper Kupp. He's not just Hunter Renfrow. Like, Ladd McConkey, wide receiver 5. And I think really for everything that I was seeing, of course, in like mock drafts, pre-NFL Combine, Ladd McConkey was going somewhere like in the early second round. After the NFL Combine, just based on those speeds and those measurements, definitely pushed him in the back half of the first round of the actual NFL draft, which for me, boom, that happens. Your first round wide receiver, you got all these measurables, you got the college production at Georgia, like boom, you get pushed up my overall, of course, rookie dynasty wide receiver rankings. So have him here as my wide receiver 5.
Man, I can't believe that we both have McConkey all the way up at 5. That's it scares me a little bit, the hype train, but I gotta tell you, he passes the eye test. For me, that's like my biggest thing is like, if I throw on the tape, like it shouldn't take me long to be like, that's a guy. And he passes eye test for me because it's like, yeah, you get the Cooper Kupp comparisons or, the Wes Welker comparisons. I get that because he does do a little bit of that, but he does it from the outside. It's actually kind of weird almost the way that he does it. But like you said, he hit a sub 4.4, 4.39 40. He hit 13 on the bench too, which was actually 2 more than Brian Thomas and the same as Brendan Rice. So it wasn't just like, oh, he's fast. He's fast. He's strong. He attacks the ball at the point of the catch. He was one of the smoothest wide receivers in all of the combine. It wasn't even the 40 that impressed me the most. The gauntlet drill. He looked by far like the best wide receiver in the class during that gauntlet drill. It was crazy. Like he was just so quick down a straight line, working in space, and again, attacking the ball at the point of the catch at every moment. And then when I watched him, in open field, like he was fast twitch, like his hips and his feet. It's like, man, this guy looked. I was like, you could have, if you held one eye closed, was that Malik Neighbors or was that Lad McConkey out there busting people's ankles in open space? Like it's actually, he's damn impressive. Yeah, I have him at the comp that I would say is like he's fast Cooper Kupp, who can win on the outside and inside, but he it's like he works from outside in. So yeah, I'm enamored with Lad McConkey.
And I think the thing that a lot of people, if you look at the tape from this year, like when he got injured and went out, the Georgia offense honestly struggled more when Lad was out than when Brock Bowers was out. Now, I'm not saying I think Brock Bowers was still a more important weapon for Georgia. Like if I had to pick who's going to be the better prospect coming out, of course, I'd say Brock Bowers. But Lad McConkey definitely showed that he deserves to be in that type of conversation. So absolutely love that we're both there aligned on Mr. Lad McConkey.
Man, all right. So let's go to number 6. You can have this one. Let's see who you've got at number 6.
Yeah, wide receiver 6 for me is going to be Xavier Worthy. And I think a lot of the hype has been around the 40 time, the 4.22 Usain Bolt type man sprinter himself. I think for me, when I look at Xavier Worthy, the college production profile is very interesting when you consider the fact that his first year as a freshman had a 30% target share. It then continued to dip his sophomore and junior seasons, where, if, like I said, if you would have looked back, his freshman season and when we were projecting out this 2024 class, you would have said Xavier Worthy is looking like the clear wide receiver one of that 2024 class. Of course, things change over the next 2 seasons, but for me, looking at, he had that 30% target share season, so like we know he can command targets. The biggest thing just the last few years has just been the way that Texas has kind of changed under Steve Sarkisian and the way that they were using Xavier Worthy a lot more down the field as a field stretcher, which arguably we've seen the comparisons to John Ross. So that always makes people nervous. We see a burner, like we can even go back year after year after year, like Henry Ruggs, Jameson Williams. We're like, okay, this guy's fast, but like, how is that fast actually going to translate to fantasy football value? Because if you think about it from an NFL perspective, the really only wide receiver that's fast that probably puts up insane fantasy points year after year is Tyreek Hill. And so you hate to say that this guy's going to be the next Tyreek Hill, because that's like saying, I don't know. I don't have a really cool, funny phrase to say, but that's almost impossible to predict who that's going to be. I just think he's going to land somewhere now that he's gotten that fast of a 40 time in the first round, in the back half of the first round, with a team that's going to have a good quarterback. And I think that's going to just give him every opportunity to succeed, not only at the NFL level, but also for us in the dynasty fantasy space. So I think it's a pretty clean shot to take. I understand a lot of the weakness concerns about route running, about his stone cold hands, like it feels like Deontay Johnson type hands that Mr. Xavier Worthy has. But I definitely think I'm not just riding the high of the buzz, because if I was, I'd probably just push Xavier Worthy up past Lad. But I feel very comfortable where I have Xavier Worthy at this moment.
So this is probably one of my biggest snubs, because not only do I not have him at number 6, I don't even have him on my list. And that's not, it's not to knock Xavier Worthy, but I struggle sometimes with players where I have to go against all of NFL history. And, Xavier Worthy, you kind of talked about some of the negatives. I look at the size, 5'11", 165, broke the combine record for the 40. That was great. He also has a crazy high vertical. He has a 41-inch vertical. They knocked out at the combine. So I thought that was really impressive. But he's an excellent return man. And that is both a compliment to his overall game and a knock on his fantasy value. And the reason for that is throughout history, I mean, honestly, Deshaun Jackson, probably the best prototypical wide receiver of the same size and skill set in terms of NFL success. Like if you were in a comp, like whose career would you want Xavier Worthy for the type of player that you are? I would argue that Djax is probably top of list, and he only had 5,000-yard receivers in his entire career. 5,000-yard seasons in his entire career. And a lot of it was because, he did a lot of stuff in the return game, which a lot of leagues doesn't count for fantasy points. So who gives a shit for our purposes? But then again, he's undersized, the hands, everything to me is screaming that, is this guy going to be the next Dante Hall? Who, again, fantastic player. This isn't to say that Dante Hall wasn't an incredible NFL player, but he wasn't a great fantasy asset. Ted Ginn, again, excellent NFL player, not the greatest fantasy asset. So I kind of see Xavier Worthy, especially after putting up the numbers at the combine, I potentially see him being overdrafted. And, when you're talking about if he's going to be a late first round pick, probably going to go to a team that maybe isn't necessarily needing to use him right away. I see him being kind of more of like an auxiliary piece of the offense, but a major part of special teams. And I think that's going to be a reason that coaches are really wanting to get him. And again, that's great for his NFL profile, not great for fantasy football.
Yeah, I think Dynasty IM was the person that, like, first thing, I mean, yeah, if you compare him directly to like a guy like John Ross, it just doesn't feel great. Knowing what we know now, or your Henry Ruggs, because there isn't a large sample size of these guys absolutely popping off. So definitely it is a risky investment to be investing your late first round super flex pick into a guy like Xavier Worthy. And but I think for him, it comes down to, we haven't seen a guy like him like with a 30% target share as a freshman. And that type of profile, like, it makes it a little bit different than some of the fast burners that we've seen before. So that's just kind of the bet that I'm taking. But I also hear you 100%. We're like, okay, if I invest in this guy, like, it is absolutely the type of boom or bust, like light my pick on fire type of pick. So yeah, if maybe you're competing and you have to take a shot on, like, it's either superstar or bust for Xavier Worthy, then I'm right there with you.
Yeah. I think the Dante Hall comparison, that one was sneaky apt. Even though Dante Hall was a little bit smaller, he was more compact. And that's something that always worries me. Is like when you're 5'11", but also rocking at like 155 pounds or whatever, or 165 pounds, like that's rough, so that worries me as well. But we'll get into my number 6, because this one is definitely probably, maybe it's just conjecture. Maybe I'm the crazy one here, but how could I leave Jerry Rice's kid off this list? Like, just for that reason alone, he had to be in my top 10. But then the more I watched and the more I actually dived into it, it's like, okay, well, he's 6'2", 208. He's big body kid, runs a 4.5 40. That to me doesn't matter as much when you are talking about like NFL speed. When I actually watch the tape, I almost feel like he's being underrated because of Caleb Williams. It's like the hype around Caleb Williams being a potentially generational prospect has almost taken the shine off of just how good Brendan Rice was in terms of his contested catch, the way he was running his routes, the way he would come back and attack the ball, the way that he was able to work with Caleb Williams oftentimes on those like non-designed plays to create big plays, the way he worked the sideline. He did a lot of like prototypical NFL receiver type stuff that, makes sense. He would learn that from his dad. It's like, if you don't think he's out there running them hills and making a deal with God with Jerry Rice by his side, like, fuck off. Like, come on. Wherever this kid ends up landing, and the fact that I think his draft capital could actually be like a little bit less in terms of like, I do think he could be a second or even a third round pick. I almost think that's better because you're going to give him a chip on his shoulder and he could potentially land in a better situation because of that. So A little bit of it is definitely projecting, but from what I watched, I was like, yeah, he was basically Caleb Williams' best receiver. And to me, it's like Jerry Rice's kid is going to be successful almost in spite of himself. So maybe, again, it's a little bit of conjecture, and maybe I'm buying into the name a little too much. But again, everything I saw from this kid, I was like, I almost would really struggle to believe that he doesn't make the leap as an NFL wide receiver. And I think he could end up being, amongst all of these guys, potentially, one with a lot more longevity. So if you're talking about dynasty football, if Jerry Rice is played for 20 years and his kid plays for 10, like I could see that again. It's like little bit of conjecture. I know it's you're putting a lot on his plate because his father was literally the greatest wide receiver of all time. But when your father was literally the greatest wide receiver of all time, yeah, I feel like that's going to rub off.
I am not there with you, Jack, but that's okay. I don't have Brendan Rice in my top 10. I don't actually have him in my top 12. I think the biggest concern that I had with Brendan Rice is just because he never had over a 15% target share in his college career. And that to me, like if you can't earn targets in college, then I feel like you're not really going to earn targets in the NFL. Now, to your point, Jerry Rice, absolute legend. So like all due respect to that man, like greatest wide receiver of all time. So something had to rub off on his son. Same way we're watching LeBron James with his two kids. I just get a little bit worried because it feels like where's he going to land? What type of draft capital is he going to get? Is he going to be, he has the body to be a big level type, almost like Michael Thomas type wide receiver in the NFL. It just is going to really depend on how he's used in the NFL. So for me, I'm not as high as you are on him, but I also respect where you're coming from with Brendan Rice.
Michael Thomas was a great comparison, or like an Anquan Bolden type once upon a time. Like, I don't think he's going to be like this crazy separator, but a lot of what he was doing was contested catches and was, really high level catches, even though it wasn't like always, like you said, the volume wasn't always there. The consistency in what he was doing to me was there. So I'm probably rating him higher than 99% of the fantasy world will. But it's also because, yeah, to me, it's like I can see in the tape what I think is going to play at the NFL level. And, it's a little bit more of a projection of I think he's going to be good.
Yeah. No, I respect that. I respect that. My wide receiver, what was that your wide receiver 6?
Yeah, that was my 6. So you can hit us up with your number 7, lucky number 7 here.
Lucky number 7 is Adonai Mitchell for me. Had himself a great combine. We're talking same kind of thing. A 6'2" guy that can run a 4.34. That's absolutely incredible. Really, his profile, there's a lot that he's also one of these kind of like head scratchers where, I mean, both these Texas wide receivers definitely rose up draft boards. But when you look at Adonai, of course, his first 2 seasons at the University of Georgia, got injured his second season, so only played in 5 games. But if you look at his freshman season, he did have a 14% target share. This year it was over 15%. There's just a lot of, this is kind of when you start to get into like the nitpicking of your kind of your rankings. And for me, a lot of it came down to the effort that Adonai showed at the second half of games. If he wasn't getting targeted a lot because, maybe the ball was going to Xavier Worthy, Jatavian Sanders, or even Jonathan Brooks out of the backfield with Quinn Ewers as a quarterback, like he kind of didn't always put in the effort and the routes. And so I've never been a college athlete. I've never been as supremely talented as a guy like this. So I'm not over here questioning effort. I just like that was kind of my big takeaway when I was studying Adonai Mitchell. But everything that he did at the combine screamed, of course, late first round, early second round type wide receiver in the NFL draft. And so therefore, when I'm looking at my rankings, a lot of it's based on draft capital. A lot of that's based on projection. And I think Adonai Mitchell definitely has at least the athleticism to end up being a high quality X. I'm not going to say an elite level wide receiver. If I thought he was going to be an elite level wide receiver, I'd be pushing him way further up my wide receiver rankings for rookies. But I think he's definitely going to be valuable for you to take somewhere in that like 112 to 202 range of your Superflex draft.
Yeah, when I was doing my list, he was the one that I was really struggling with the most. leaving off the board because I was struggling to find beyond what you said about he can be a little bit of a diva sometimes. But I mean, we've seen that a million times in the NFL. Stephon Diggs has never had a problem popping off 1,000-yard seasons every year. So that wasn't like that big of a deal to me, but it was like he's 6'2", 205, sub 440. He had a 39.5-inch vertical, good separator, contested catch, body adjustment, like everything was there. You could honestly, again, like the last 4 or 5 guys on the list, like you could shuffle them around and it really wouldn't bother me that much. But I couldn't put him above my 7 and 8 is really where it was. And then 9 and 10, I just kind of liked them more. But I'm with you that I do think he is very talented. He was the one snub. It's like you always have that one snub where it's like, yeah, okay, I snubbed a couple of these guys, but it's like I did it for a reason. He was the one that I was like, fuck. I feel like this is the one that could come back on me. It's like I had to knock somebody out to get Brendan Rice in here. Maybe he was the one that I should have left in, and I should have knocked out one of these other guys lower on my list. For me, though, number 7, he's been getting a ton of hype, and he's probably going to keep getting hype after he showed out at the combine. But Ricky Pearsall, this guy, man, from Florida, 6'1", 189, dropped a 4'4", 140. Okay, that's great. 42-inch vertical. That was damn impressive. But to me, and I'm almost, I don't know why more guys don't run the 3-cone and the shuttle, to be honest, is like official times. I think it's because they're scared that it's going to make them look bad because often it does. But Ricky Pearsall crushed with a 6'6", 3-cone, 405 shuttle, dropped 17 on the bench also. So all around physical, physically athletic wide receiver, prototypical size at 6'1", 189. Like he was a do-it-all guy. He's a tough runner. Great. He actually reminded me more of like an actual Cooper Kupp comp as compared to like a Ladd McConkey, who I thought was like Ricky Pearsall plus. But man, Ricky Pearsall is still damn good. That's not meant to be a detriment to him. Honestly, I could have even had him a little higher. Like I could have had him and Brendan flipped. I ended up going with Brendan because I do think that NFL pedigree is going to carry over. But with Ricky Pearsall, man, he is just a talented kid.
Yeah, I do not have Ricky in my top 10. I do have him in my top 13 though, and I think he's a super talented wide receiver. Everything you said is spot on. I think had a pretty good year here at the University of Florida, like you said, this last year had a pretty good combine. So I'm with you. I think once we get to kind of this point in the wide receiver rankings, a lot of it's just what type of flavor wide receiver do you like to draft? What type of values do you like to get? Because like we said, a lot of it's just going to be us here debating over us in the dynasty space debating for the next month and a half until the NFL draft actually happens. And then we have like cemented landing spots and we have cemented draft capital that then we can be like, we can reevaluate our wide receiver rankings. Cause I'm sure my 10 are going to be completely different here come a month from now.
Yeah, no, it's like I was saying before, all of mine are going to end up changing as soon as they have like official landing spots and everything. But I love what you said there about like the flavor of wide receiver that you tend to prefer. I think that's why a Brendan Rice or, I'll say the next guy on my list, number 8, Keon Coleman, also out of Florida, took a little bit of a knock because he ran a 4.6 40. I don't really give a shit about that because when I watch the tape, it's like, okay, well, he doesn't need a fast 40. If I was going to give him an NFL comp, honestly, he reminded me a lot of Keenan Allen, where it's like the route running, the size, and the hands, it was unfair. When he transferred to Florida, like he was making these guys look like jabronis out there. And so it is a little bit of landing spot and everything too. And yeah, I think some of the measurables may knock his status a little bit, but like he was one that I had originally off my list. I was like, I have to put Keon Coleman on this list because eye test tells me that he's better than these other guys that maybe showed out more at the combine. Like in terms of just being a pure NFL wide receiver. And yeah, I think I lean more of like a possession receiver of like a Brendan Rice or a Keon Coleman than some of my snubs. Like we already talked about Xavier Worthy. Another big one, and you might have him at some point. Troy Franklin was one that didn't crack my list, and I we'll talk about it in the honorables, but it's just to say, like, yeah, I think I prefer like the big body possession wide receivers that I can see having like that day 2-3 capital and going to good NFL offenses and just right out like kind of hitting, and you'll start hearing reports out of camp of, oh, this guy's actually like the best wide receiver in our room right now. And it's like, turns out he's actually amazing at catching the ball and like he's just, again, Keon Coleman was just a very smooth wide receiver, 6'3", 213. The size, the hands, the route running, it was very reminiscent of like a young Keenan Allen.
Yeah, I have Keon Coleman as my wide receiver 10, and honestly, I had him higher pre combine. Combine definitely pushed him down, but kind of talking as much as like people like to bash him on the 40-yard dash. Like if you looked at the way that he did the gauntlet, I think that I forget who tweeted it, but he ran like 5 miles per hour faster than Troy Franklin did through the whole gauntlet, and Troy Franklin, ran a 4.41. And so I think a lot of it is there's a difference between like track speed, which is what Xavier Worthy has, and like game speed, which a lot of these guys like they're football players. They're not track stars. So I like Keon Coleman. I think the biggest like takes that I had against him were just like his route tree that he ran in college. Like it was either goes or slants. Now granted, he dominated. Like he was a man among boys out there. So I'm with you. Had a great year at Florida State, but I still have him as my wide receiver 10. And I think he could definitely jump up. Like I think once we're kind of here in this like range of like wide receiver 7 to wide receiver 10, like if he gets amazing draft capital, if he gets amazing, landing spot, I could definitely see him bumping up over some other guys that I have. But then, yeah, I have Troy Franklin as my wide receiver 8. I love his production profile. Now, granted, a lot of people were like, he got overshadowed at the NFL Combine because he didn't run a 4.3 40-yard dash, only ran a 4.41. But he does have everything production-wise that you want out of a wide receiver. I mean, 81 receptions this year, 1,300 yards, 14 total receiving touchdowns. He's 6'2". It'll be interesting to see where he lands. I mean, he's going to be going in the first round. So if he lands on a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, like I could see that being a really good fit for a guy like Troy Franklin. So I definitely like him a little bit less than like we're talking about with Adani or Xavier or Brian Thomas Jr., but I do really like Troy Franklin as my wide receiver 8.
He's the one actually that for me was the easiest to knock off my list. And it's not anything bad. He had great production at Oregon. I can't take that away from him. He was rangy and fast, but the knocks I have against him. First of all, he's in that 6'2", but under 180 club. So it's like, yeah, those guys are, tall, but they're almost like prototypically like thin in a sense of like they don't have like the bulk of some of these other guys, especially like when you talk about like Brian Thomas, Roma Dunes, Xavier Legge, Keon Coleman. These are all like thick boys. You know what I'm saying? Troy Franklin, 6'2", but not built like these guys. And then the biggest thing for me was, and this is why I think some guys are afraid to run cone and shuttle. He had 6'9" in the 3 cone and 4.31 in the shuttle. That is not great. And when you're coming off a 4.41 40, that was, potentially disappointing to some people. To me, that tells me not only are you more straight line fast than you are maybe game speed fast, but you're not as quick in a box as you are, again, on that track in a straight line. That doesn't always translate as well to an NFL football field. So for me, he was the one that it felt like, okay, I can see that not working out. And especially if he falls with Kansas City, like that actually feels like a death knell for a wide receiver like a Troy Franklin, where it's like you're expected to like be a burner over the top. And, again, it's like we've seen them draft guys like that and it not work out over and over. And yet when they took Rashee Rice, who was more, again, of like a prototypical possession style receiver, like, oh, that actually worked way better for their offense. So I actually think that, Troy Franklin to Kansas City would be potentially bad for him. But again, it's because I struggle. I think he's going to struggle maybe to make the leap to being a true productive NFL wide receiver. And it's like, as much as this is a deep wide receiver class, not every single one of these guys is going to be an NFL superstar at the next level. So if I have to pick a guy that I'm going to bet against, unfortunately, Troy was one of my guys that I'll put him in honorable mentions instead of like on the list.
That is fair. That is fair.
All right, we're getting into the last of it here. And you said too, from like 7 to 10, these guys we could be flipping with like our honorables, like 7 to 15, honestly. Like you could just put them in a Yahtzee shaker, let those dice roll out as they may, and I would be fine with any order they came out in. I honestly don't care. But it is to say, like, I see a lot of value, but it's hard to parse it out with, not knowing where these guys are going to be going and everything. But let's wrap up the official list here. Let's get your number 9.
My number 9 is going to be Roman Wilson, wide receiver out of the University of Michigan. Ran a 4.39 at the combine, which honestly I was not expecting out of Roman Wilson. Honestly, I had the same reaction with Roman Wilson that I had with Ladd McConkey. Really, I like the way that he just wins at all levels of the field. I am an Ohio State Buckeye, so Roman Wilson absolutely killed us 3 years in a row, and it was upsetting. And a guy that's out of Honolulu, Hawaii, you absolutely love to see it. But when you look at his production, just really great production profile. I think I really like I said, his 40. There's some kind of things like with his 10 cone that I wasn't the biggest fan of. A lot of like actual measurables, like his hand size, like his wingspan, that maybe bring you a little bit of questions. But when you look at how he wins on the field, he can win from the outside, he can win from the slot. He's probably going to primarily be a slot guy. Absolutely got raving reviews from people at the Senior Bowl. Put up a really great combine. So I think Roman Wilson also really helped himself at the NFL combine and just overall with his production. So I think he'll probably go be a second round pick, probably in the first half of the second round. So if he ends up getting that type of draft capital, I mean, I really feel great with him here as my wide receiver 9.
I did really like him. I had him pretty high in my honorables. But there were other guys of like, honestly, like an Adonai Mitchell, like you mentioned earlier, that I would have had higher than him. The guy that I have at number 9, I kind of went a little bit off board here, and it's because more than anything, his tape speaks to me. And, it's funny because then I was having a debate with, shout out to Mike Kashuba. Follow him on Twitter at FF Mike Kashuba if you don't already. But he basically was like, how could you not have Troy Franklin and Xavier Worthy on your list? And I was like, well, it's different reasons, but the debate ended up basically being like Tez Walker versus Troy Franklin. And this is where, when I watched Tez, first of all, he hit the sub 4.40. He hit a 4.3640. He had a 40.5-inch vertical. Okay, awesome. When I watched the tape, he had great hands and feet. He had great separation. He had the ability to get in and out of cuts. He was a much more underrated game speed player in terms of his elusivity than what I saw in terms of his scouting report and coming out of the combine. And then at the combine, like I said, he smashed. And in my opinion, helped his draft value. So I still think he's gonna be like a late day 2, day 3 pick. But when you talk about like the Puka Nakuas of the world are the guys that hit in those late rounds. And I'm not saying he's Puka Nakua, but if you're just asking me in this list of guys that potentially are going to be day 2, day 3 picks, who do you see as having the skills and talent to potentially make that leap of being 1,000-yard wide receiver at the NFL level? And I think Tez Walker, again, very underrated in his skill set, has the potential to make that leap.
Yeah, no, I think, like I said, he's one of my honorable mentions. I know another guy you're going to list a little later was in my honorable mentions, but No, I like Tez. I think him being able to come in and really replace Josh Downs this year was absolutely huge for Drake May and that whole North Carolina offense. So, right there with you.
All right, let's wrap it up here before we get to the quick honorables. Who do you have at number 10?
Number 10, I have Keon Coleman. I mean, we already talked about Keon Coleman. I know he's a little higher for you, a little bit lower for me, but I think for me, the combine, did it affect his overall draft stock? In my opinion, yes. So therefore, I take that into account with my dynasty rankings, but it doesn't take away the production that he had at Florida State this year. Like we said, minimum boys, absolute. Like when you look at him, dude looks like he was chiseled in a lab. Like the Captain America coming out of, that's how I view Keon Coleman. He's just built different. So it'll be interesting to see where he lands as a bigger wide receiver. Whether that's like, could he be the new Gabe Davis for the Buffalo Bills, or like those are the type of landing spots where if he were to land there, you'd be like, okay, cool. We can see where that production's going to lie. I think if he lands somewhere where maybe the quarterback isn't the best, that would be my biggest concern for Keon Coleman, because like I said, he really wins down the field, has a pretty limited route tree at this point. So, I would be a little bit concerned about that. But like we said, the speed, as much as that hurt his overall draft stock, um, playing speed, track speed, two different things. And he definitely has playing speed. So
I am glad that you said Gabe Davis, because it's actually a good segue to my number 10, who is Xavier Leggett. Can we stop punishing Xavier Leggett because Jonathan Mingo and Gabe Davis exist? Like, it's not his fault that these thick boy wide receivers can't catch anything. And I know that his production profile is somewhat similar, but from what I was watching, again, on the tape, first of all, 4.39 40, cool, 40-inch vertical, awesome. At 6'1", 220, that's damn impressive. But he was making a lot more nice catches in at least the tape I was watching than what people were giving credit for. Like the way this guy was being described to me, it was like he had bricks for hands. And I'm watching him make contested catches. I'm watching him get off press. There were a couple times where he was doing really good with the hand fighting and working through press coverage, the times that he saw it. So it was like I saw more positives out of Xavier Leggett than I saw negatives. And again, the one guy that I thought I was like, Adonai Mitchell was the one that gave me a lot of cause for pause. You could switch them, and I would be totally fine with that. To me, they were like 10 and 11, but when push came to shove, I had to pick one. I ended up going with Xavier Leggett because to me, he is, just there's something there. He's got a little intangible that I just can't really put the words to it, but I can taste it, I can feel it. You know what I'm saying? I can feel it in my plums. Isn't that the stupid shit that all the fantasy people love to quote?
oh yeah. No, I have him right there as my first honorable mention. So I'm right there with you. I also two more guys that are my honorable mentions. Jalen Polk. I love him out of the University of Washington. Got overshadowed by, of course, Rome, but for good reason. Malachi Corley had an absolute terrible NFL combine. But I still like seeing in the Senior Bowl, absolutely love seeing what Malachi Corley was doing. So I think he's definitely a sleeper for me. And then honestly, Johnny Wilson at that size, I think, does he turn into a tight end at the next level? We'll have to see, but 6'6" for a wide receiver, 240. We'll have to see what that turns into. But if you're in a tight end super flex league with a tight end premium, then give me some Johnny Wilson, because there's a good chance that he ends up switching over, and then you probably got yourself. If he was maybe as a tight end, he might be going a little bit earlier just based on his measurables.
It's funny because as a wide receiver, I had him dead last on my list. And it's like, yeah, I get that he's huge, but to me, it's like I was watching, I was like, yeah, he's very meh as a wide receiver. And it's stupid that he didn't listen to his coaches who told him to convert to tight end, because he runs a 4.5 240, and he would be a much better tight end prospect than a wide receiver prospect. It's like, yeah, he actually looked like, when I was on, I was like, oh yeah, he actually looks like slow for a wide receiver. He looks fast for a tight end, but slow for a wide receiver. Some of the guys, I really had so many that I was like, again, I really wanted this list to be 20 deep for the wide receivers, but that would be a ridiculous show. I'm never going to do that. But just quickly running through some of the guys that I really felt bad leaving off. Adonai Mitchell, I've said over and over, was like the number one for me of biggest snub actually on my list. I wanted to have him as like a number 11, but we both had to make that decision. You ended up, Adonai a little higher, and it pushed down to where Xavier was your first honorable. Me, it was the flip. I had Xavier as my last guy, and Adonai as my first honorable. So, and that was very close. Troy Franklin, I talked about it's more, I see straight line speed and a lack of size. So that kind of scares me. Xavier Worthy, it's generational. How many actual like super great return men have we seen be super successful NFL wide receivers? Like 3. And then, you talked about Roman Wilson was on my list. Luke McCaffrey, CMC's brother. It's crazy to me that there was not as much hype about McCaffrey's brother coming into the league as like a legitimate wide receiver prospect. And I put that out on Twitter. And of course, as soon as you put that out on Twitter, it's like the 5 analysts that actually did talk about him had to come and put their articles in my mentions so that I could go and check that out and be like, yes, you were right. Thank you. But I appreciate you guys, but it's like, okay, but 95% of the fantasy community isn't fucking talking about how CMC's brother is in this draft. So what do you want me to say? But he actually showed out at the combine, 4.4640, 6.7 on the 3-cone and 4.02 on the shuttle. Again, I want to see more guys running 3-cone and shuttle and get their official times, because to me, it's like your straight line speed on your 40 is great and all, but I want to know how agile and how good your acceleration is. And I'm going to get more of that from your 3-cone and your shuttle drills and from your gauntlet drills than I'm ever going to get from your straight line speed out of your 40. And then the one guy you said, you said Jalen Polk and Malachi Corley. Corley was a tackle breaking machine when I was watching tape on him, so I like that. But the 3 guys, I would be remiss if we left this show without talking about Javon Baker out of UCF. Great body control and catch radius, 6'1", 202, 4'5", 40. Malik Washington, a little bit more undersized here, but he was the one that actually was very Steve Smith-esque to me. 5'8", 191 pounds. So yes, small, but compact, thick. Like he weighs more than Troy Franklin, for fuck's sakes, who's 6'2". This is what I'm talking about, where it's like Troy Franklin made me nervous in that sense. But he also put up 19 on the bench. So again, very strong Malik Washington out of Virginia. And then Jalen McMillan is the last one I'll talk about here. 6'1", 197, showed great separation and football speed, even though didn't necessarily show out at the combine, kind of average combine scores. But when I watched tape on him, I was like, again, when I look at like game speed versus combine speed, a guy who could potentially make the leap late, Jalen McMillan was one on my list.
No, I like McMillan too. He also probably would be one of my honorable mentions. But it's hard when you're debating the 2 other Washington wide receivers, because they both have their own unique skill sets. I still think Polk's going to get drafted ahead of McMillan, so that's kind of where I gave the bump to him in the honorable mention. But I like both, so it'd be interesting to see where they land.
Actually, I lied. I have one more that I have to talk about.
You're allowed.
Bub Means. He's just so means out of Pitt. But no, he was real strong. He was another one that had like a really high bench. He hit 19 on the bench also. 6'1", 212, 4'4", 340. Strong kid with good hands. Bub Means out of Pitt. Sleeper. So he was the last guy for real this time, because honestly, there's still like 5 or 6 more that I could talk about, because wide receivers for 2024, holy hell, are there a lot of them. All right.
Hopefully you didn't trade away your picks. Hopefully you didn't trade away your picks, because this is the year.
So I'm bad for that, but I will tell you, like, this is now the time of before a lot of these guys actually get drafted. There's a lot of hype right now for the number 1 draft picks, but I think people are kind of like still willing to give up 2s and 3s right now. Go out there, start trying to get as many 2s and 3s as you can, because there's going to be a lot of value in those middle rounds, especially if you're only in like a 10 or 12 man dynasty. Like I'm in 16 man. So it's like, okay, well, at the 216, that's basically like a 3rd round almost for most leagues. But like I said, in the 2nd and 3rd round for most of your dynasty leagues at 10 and 12 man, like there's going to be a shit ton of value to be had. And those picks are a lot easier to acquire. So go and stack as many of them as you can right now.
100%.
Awesome, man. Caleb, thank you so much for joining me and helping carry me through the rookie top 10 wide receiver show for Dynasty 2024. One more time for the fine folks out there. The few that in between that don't know where to find you, tell us all the work you do.
Yeah, mostly just on YouTube at Caleb Nemi. You can find me. I do redraft fantasy football, do dynasty fantasy football. So come check me out if you're interested. But I appreciate, Jack, you having me on for a second time. Hopefully this isn't my last time. Hopefully I make the cut for a 3rd time. We'll have to do another show in the near future.
Hell yeah. You know, you're always welcome back. Once I figure out some more ideas and shit to do, I'll hit you up and we'll have you back on the show.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And thank you guys out there for making it through. If you got this far into the show, make sure you super kick that subscribe button. Go drop Caleb a follow. And I will catch all of you guys on the flip side.
He's running down the middle by the 50. He's at the 30. He's bare-chested and banging his chest. Now he runs the opposite way. He runs at the 50. He runs at the 40. The guy is drunk, but there he goes. The 20. They're chasing him. They're not going to get him. Waving his arms, bare-chested. Somebody stop that man. Here comes